Welcome to week 17 of the 2023 NFL season. The tight end position has never been safer. We have tons of guys to pick from. The upside is incredible, and we are absolutely going to win our matchups this week based solely on the tight end position. Oh man. Whew. I must have been having a really good dream because I've been living in this nightmare where tight ends are incredibly risky and we never know who to play on a weekly basis. And the guy that we drafted number one at the tight end position this year can't even finish as a top 12 tight end the last couple of weeks, and we've got injuries. And I'm pretty sure I just woke up from a dream where I was telling everybody that the tight end position was safe, because that certainly isn't true. And if you're playing for a fantasy championship in week 17, you better have one of the top guys or we're just throwing darts. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? The injury to TJ Hockenson this week is absolutely devastating. Travis Kelce has put together back-to-back performances outside the top 20 tight ends. And right now, trying to find a good matchup very rarely even matters, because when we find the good matchups, tight ends are underperforming anyway. Week 16 was super tough for the position, and hopefully in week 17, if you've got one of the top guys, we can bounce back. But if you find yourself playing for a fantasy championship this week and you don't have one of the top guys, this may be the most important tight end video that you watch all season long. Make sure you all hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notification so anytime we drop content, you'll know about it right away. Let's go ahead and lock it in for week 17 and figure out what we've got available to us for a tight end. David Njoku has been an absolute godsend over the last few weeks here, finishing as a top 3 tight end each of the last 3 weeks. Who would have known that Joe Flacco in 2023 would have been the key to unlocking David Njoku's potential? Over the last 3 weeks, he has 4 touchdowns, and he's getting the volume of the top tight ends in the league. He's an absolute smash must start. And even in a tougher matchup, going up against a secondary for the New York Jets that has done very well this season, it's really hard to sit David Njoku in the fantasy playoffs knowing how well he has played. Do I think he's going to go absolutely off and finish as a top 3 tight end again this week? Maybe not, given this matchup. But based on the volume alone, he's a must start in any matchup. And really, the only guy I would start over him this week is maybe nobody. Maybe he will be my number 1 tight end. From a betting perspective, I'm going to be smashing all the overs that I can on the Detroit and Dallas matchup, and hopefully that means really good things for the tight end position. Now, both Sam Laporta and Jake Ferguson are going to be in green in this matchup, but I'll tell you, they're a little bit closer to yellow than what I would like. Now, we're going to be starting them regardless, right? These are 2 top 10 tight ends, and based on the current situation at the tight end position, more than likely, you don't have very many guys that you could play over either of them anyway. So we're going to run it with them, and we're just going to keep our fingers crossed. But here's why there may be some risk involved. For Sam Laporta, Dallas does a pretty decent job of limiting tight ends. Now, this could go one of 2 ways. The first way could be that Sam Laporta is limited, that the pass rush is getting home. Jared Goff isn't able to get set in the pocket, and because of that, he has one of those road performances where, from a fantasy perspective, it just doesn't light up the scoreboard. And because of that, Sam Laporta doesn't have the upside that he would need. Now, there are some historical factors going into this that Sam Laporta could break if he were to have a couple of big games to end the season. I wouldn't doubt it if that played a little bit of a part in trying to get him the football a little bit more often here at the end of the year. But Detroit's not going to risk anything for that. They're going to set up whatever they need to be successful and win this game. For Jake Ferguson, really for me, it's about CJ Gardner-Johnson, whether or not he is able to play this week. If he's able to make it back and he truly is 100% and feeling well, you're likely going to see him guarding Jake Ferguson a little bit more often than the rest of the defense. If that happens, it could end up being a little bit of a down performance day for Ferguson, where maybe he doesn't have the upside that we would like. But we know Detroit has struggled against tight ends this season, and he's got plenty of upside, especially if this game ends up going into a shootout type of atmosphere. For me, Jake Ferguson will probably be ranked over Sam Laporta this week. I like the potential for Jake Ferguson. I'm just trying to help you understand that we could see a little bit less of an upside than what we would like, given some potential factors. After back-to-back weeks as the tight end 4, Isaiah Likely was fitting in perfectly as a replacement for Mark Andrews, especially if you owned Mark Andrews in fantasy and you needed to use Isaiah Likely after his injury. Or maybe in fantasy you just didn't have very good consistency at the tight end position. You used a top waiver priority and you grabbed Isaiah Likely, and that's been able to help stabilize your lineup a little bit. Unfortunately, he did fall back down to earth a little bit last week in a matchup that didn't end up being nearly as much of a shootout as a lot of people anticipated. But that option is going to be here once again going up against the Miami Dolphins, who's, don't get me wrong, their defense has been spectacular this season. Quite honestly, I think the defense has been a lot better than what some people anticipated. But they still give up a few extra points to the tight end position, and this is an area that Lamar Jackson and Isaiah Likely could definitely connect this week, especially if we're seeing a neutral game script or we're seeing a game script that allows Baltimore to throw the football a ton this week. Keep an eye on Isaiah Likely. I do think he has a wide range of outcomes. Honestly, he could be as high as tight end 1 this week, but he also could fall outside the top 12. In the New England-Buffalo matchup, there's nothing but risk involved. Hunter Henry missed last week with a knee injury, and we've yet to see whether or not he will be available this week. If he is, he's probably going to move to yellow, and he will be a guy that could find himself inside my top 15 tight ends, just based on him and Bailey Zappi and their connection in the couple of games prior to him being hurt. Now, last week, I did call the Mike Gesicki touchdown, and I told everybody out there, hey, if Hunter Henry is out, take a look at Mike Gesicki, because Denver allows some major points to the tight end position. That ended up happening, but this matchup isn't going to be nearly as friendly. So if Hunter Henry doesn't play, I'm not really interested in anything at the tight end position for New England, because Pharaoh Brown and Mike Gesicki were essentially splitting snaps at that point and saw an equal amount of time on the field. If Hunter Henry plays, he'll go over both of those guys and he'll see more time than either of them. Now, Dalton Kincaid has absolutely flatlined. Since Dawson Knox came back, Kincaid has done absolutely nothing to help our fantasy team. In fact, over the last 3 weeks, he has finished as the tight end 29, 80, and 52. And Dawson Knox isn't doing anything either to help out the fantasy cause. So unfortunately, for a position that was actually a strength just a few short weeks ago, where owners were able to put Dalton Kincaid into their lineup and get some nice upside, they haven't done anything else as of recent. And because of that, we're not even considering either of those guys. Seeing as that the Chicago Bears allow the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position, and that Kyle Pitts has touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 games, why not? Why not start him in your fantasy championship this week? I mean, it would make complete sense, right? Kyle Pitts does basically nothing all year long, and then right before your fantasy championship, all of a sudden he has a couple of great games, looking like, hey, maybe he's reeling us back in a little bit. Now he gets a really good matchup. Let's lock him in. Boom, we get smacked in the face. Kyle Pitts does absolutely nothing this weekend. That's why he's in yellow. He's got a great matchup. He's been playing well the last couple of weeks, but it's Kyle freaking Pitts. It's Arthur Smith. We have no idea what's going to happen with these guys on a weekly basis. If you got to risk it this week, the upside is probably there for him to score a touchdown. But just know if you wake up Monday morning and see absolutely crap from him in your fantasy lineup, that's all on you. Nothing I can do to help you there. And I don't know if anyone has realized this, because in the past, Cole Kmet and this Bears offense definitely has its up and downs, right? We've seen Cole Kmet have some really good games and then kind of disappear. But over his last 8 games, Cole Kmet has been a top 12 tight end 7 times. Now, he hasn't had a ton of huge performances that has made that streak stick out to you, but he's been fairly consistent. And if you've been playing him, you've been pretty happy with the production. Now, even though Atlanta has been pretty decent against the pass this year, they still allow the 7th most points to the tight end position. So, Cole Kmet, we're going to lock you in this week, baby. And quite honestly, he's probably going to be, man, it's going to be close to top 5, maybe top 5, top 7 for Cole Kmet. Definitely liking what I potentially see from him this week, especially if DJ Moore continues to be limited after getting his ankle rolled on last week. Well, Chiguyoko finally found the end zone last week, and yeah, maybe it was on a trick play from Derrick Henry, but it's a touchdown nonetheless, and now he has 2 top 12 performances over the last 4 weeks. And we've seen a little bit of an uptick in his usage, and that's been great, but it hasn't quite reached the ability for us to start him on a consistent basis. And this week, I am getting sucked in a little bit because he gets the Houston Texans, allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position and one of the worst defending tight end teams in all of football. So is the opportunity going to be there this week? Absolutely it will, especially if it's a negative game script and especially if they're not able to run the football like they were a couple of weeks ago. But in this same matchup, 2 weeks ago, he only got 3 targets. Now, he caught all 3 of those for 36 yards. And the big playmaking has been there. We've talked about it recently where we've discussed Chigiooko averaging well over 11 yards per reception at times. But we need more targets. If we can get Chigiooko to like 6 targets this week, then I definitely think we're finding a fantasy viable performance. But there's a lot of risk because yellow is a lot closer to red than it is to green. And if you're having to start Chigiooko, you're not loving it. Me, I would rather bet on Chigiooko. Now, I'm not going to worry about my season-long fantasy team with Chigiooko. If you want to do a DFS lineup with him, bet on a prop, something like that, I'm all for it. But I'm not loving his opportunity this week, especially if your fantasy championship hinges on it. Now, Dalton Schultz is going to be facing the team that allows the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position this season. And for Tennessee, the opportunity to potentially shut down Dalton Schultz will be there, and that's why he's in yellow. Now, the big hope is that CJ Stroud returns this week. And if he does, then Dalton Schultz is going to jump up to green for me because with no Tank Dell, I have to bet on the fact that Dalton Schultz is going to get peppered with targets. He had 11 targets last week and he caught 8 of those. And we could see similar production this week with CJ Stroud, who I would trust a lot more to actually get those targets to him. So keep an eye on that. If you plan on playing Dalton Schultz, we're going to want to know whether or not CJ Stroud is playing. If he doesn't, then maybe we do turn our attention elsewhere. Because at that point, not a whole lot of ceiling for him, but he would have a decent floor if he's getting a lot of targets. But with CJ Stroud, top 6, top 8 potential would definitely feel like it's locked in. This Raiders and Colts matchup will not bring a lot to be desired for the tight end position. Michael Mayer didn't even play last week after scoring a touchdown 2 weeks ago, but his inconsistencies is not something that we're willing to risk in our fantasy championship. And for Kylen Granson, he's also a guy that's been splitting a lot of time with 2 other tight ends, rotating quite often. And even though he leads the tight end in targets this year, he hasn't been able to turn in enough fantasy viable performances for us to feel comfortable to roll him out, even if the matchup feels okay. Evan Engram has been a top 6 tight end 3 of the last 4 weeks and a top 12 tight end 4 of the last 5 weeks. So he's obviously giving you some really solid performances down the stretch here, especially with Christian Kirk missing, Zay Jones banged up, and really not having a whole lot of confidence in the consistency of this Jaguars offense. Now, who's going to be at quarterback this week? That is yet to be seen. And that definitely could bring a lot of risk for Evan Engram. But once again, I just mentioned it. Who else are we throwing the football to? You've got Calvin Ridley, and then you've got Evan Engram, and that's basically it. Now, the biggest concern here for me is the fact that Carolina is really, really good at stopping the pass. They allow the 9th fewest points to the tight end position. So Evan Engram could definitely see a lower ceiling, and we could see a whole lot of running the football with Travis Etienne. If that happens, then finishing right around tight end 12 is probably going to be the best bet for Evan Engram. If we can get him around 6 to 8 targets, and maybe this game stays a little bit closer throughout 4 quarters, then we can find a little bit more upside for him, even if it doesn't really reach more than top 8 potential. Now, the New York Giants have announced that Tyrod Taylor, that's right, Tyrod, not Tyrod, is going to be starting over Tommy DeVito this week. And if there's a couple of things we know about Tyrod Taylor, it's this. Number one, he doesn't get enough love for throwing the deep ball. The guy is actually really, really good as a deep passer, and I don't think very many people realize that. But number two, if he's not throwing the deep ball, he's peppering his tight end with targets. He loves to look at his tight end. And Darren Waller being back and healthy could definitely be a great advantage for the New York Giants this week. Now, unfortunately, it might not be much of an advantage for our fantasy roster because more than likely, if you were using Darren Waller this season, you're not playing for a fantasy championship. Now, maybe you had him as a backup. Maybe you had him as a guy that's still on the waiver wire that you were keeping an eye on, and you could pick him up this week and potentially use him if you've lost like TJ Hawkinson. So maybe keep those things in mind. Do I think Darren Waller has a great ceiling this week? No, I do not, because he hasn't had a great ceiling at all this season. But given the matchup being a little bit on the better side for him, and the fact that Tyrod will probably be looking his way early and often, I definitely could see a super safe floor hovering right around that top 12 tight end mark. Arizona and Philadelphia will be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Fellas, if that beard is getting out of control just like your boys, then make sure you head over to manscaped.com and take a look at all of their awesome brand new beard products. And once Michigan and the Detroit Lions are done with their playoff runs, I'm definitely going to be getting rid of the playoff beard. But for now, I got to keep it squeaky clean. And Manscaped has some great products that allow me to do that. So go check out everything that they have right now. And when you check out, use code word headliners and you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Unfortunately, Trey McBride was not able to take advantage of a really good matchup last week, but it wasn't like they didn't try, because Trey McBride got peppered with targets once again. He caught 6 of his 8 targets last week, and since week 7, Trey McBride has only seen 2 games with less than 8 targets. He is, quite frankly, the #1 wide receiver on this team right now. And we know the Philadelphia secondary can be absolute trash, but we also know that Philadelphia will probably beat Arizona in this matchup. And because of that, Arizona is going to be in some negative game script, allowing for some really good upside opportunity for Trey McBride. I am absolutely locking him in as a potential top 5 option this week. Now, Arizona does a really good job of limiting the tight end position, allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to the position on the season. But Dallas Goedert has back-to-back games with 9 targets now. But like I just mentioned, talking about Trey McBride, this is a game that I believe Philadelphia should probably win pretty easily. And if they do, we're probably not going to see a ton of passing from the Eagles at this point. If it was more of a neutral game script, then I would say, yeah, let's lock Dallas Goedert in as a pretty safe option this week, given the amount of targets he has seen. But honestly, he's going to have to see targets early and often. He's going to have to make up his points in the first half. Could he score a touchdown? Maybe. Could he get 7 or 8 targets in this game? Possibly. But those targets aren't going to be worth a whole much if we get to halftime and Philadelphia is already up by 2 or more scores. For those of you keeping track, over the last 2 weeks, Taysom Hill has been the, let me check my notes here, tight end 58 and 61. And since weeks 6 through 9, when he strung together 4 top 12 performances as a tight end, he's only finished as a top 12 tight end once since then. That is the roller coaster that Taysom Hill is. And I try to warn everybody all the time about it. Now, Taysom Hill, are you going to rely on him championship week, putting him in your tight end spot, when we know that one of the bigger reasons he reaches his upside is rushing potential, but he's going against one of the top rushing defenses in all of football right now? There's no way in the world I'm risking it with Taysom Hill. If you want to risk it with somebody, risk it with Juwan Johnson, who's going up against a team that has a terrible time of stopping true traditional tight ends, and he also has back-to-back games with a touchdown. There's taking calculated risk and there's taking stupid risk. Calculated risk is Juwan Johnson. Stupid risk is Taysom Hill. And there's no way in the world that I'm even considering Cade Otton. One of the best tight end matchups in all of football last week, and Cade Otton got 1 target in a game where Tampa Bay scored 30 points. He's not being utilized. He's not being looked at. He's going to have a touchdown every once in a while. He's going to have an okay game every once in a while. But here at the end of the season, we just need to stop chasing it. A roller coaster of Kittle. Roller coaster of George Kittle. Well, if I didn't scare you away with the singing, then you're still here for the analysis. And George Kittle is one of the best tight ends in all of football, with some of the best upside in all of football. But that's exactly what he is. He's a roller coaster. I mean, just let me read you the stretch of games that he has had this season. And I'm not even going to try to remember all this. So I'm going to read it right off of the sheet here. So to start the season, he was the tight end 27 and 32, and then put together the tight end 5 week. Awesome. Maybe on the upcline. Then he went back down to 45. All right, George Kittle underperforming again. Then he was the tight end 1 in week 5. Awesome, we're back. Let's go, baby. And then he was the tight end 51. And at that point, everyone wants to be done with George Kittle. And at that point, I tried reminding everybody, hey, things are going to get better. This is what you get from George Kittle. And then he snaps off the tight end 8, tight end 3, has a bye week, tight end 2, then tight end 1. And then what does he do for us in week 12 against Seattle? Tight end 30. And then he's the tight end 9 and a tight end 5. And we're like, yes, let's go, George Kittle, just when we need you. And then he's the tight end 20 against Arizona. And then he's back to tight end 1 this past week. So that's what you get with George Kittle. Like, you can't really sit him unless you have safe options. But is there really a safe option at the tight end position right now? So having George Kittle is all about just assuming the risk and knowing that he's going to be one of the highest scoring tight ends in every single week. But also he's going to give you performances that aren't going to do very much for you. Now, Washington does allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position, but their defense is ranked 31st against the pass. So you know what? I'll be willing to bet on George Kittle once again this week. Could the upside be there? Absolutely. The floor could just fall out from underneath your feet though, and you could come crashing down quicker than an elevator whose cable snapped. Now, Logan Thomas did score a touchdown last week, and it was announced earlier that Jacoby Brissett is going to be starting the final 2 games of the season at quarterback. Could that make a big difference for Logan Thomas? Absolutely it could. If you remember last season when Jacoby Brissett was the starter in Cleveland, he targeted the crap out of David Njoku. So while I fully expect Jacoby Brissett to utilize Logan Thomas this week, I also know the matchup absolutely sucks. But if Washington can play from behind, even if we can get Logan Thomas like 8 targets, maybe it's not the highest of upside plays, but if he could average around 8 yards per reception, it could still be a decent enough floor to get you through the week. If you're looking for anybody on the waiver wire to utilize because maybe you lost TJ Hockenson and there's just nobody else around, Logan Thomas is going to be a guy. Absolutely. You could play, even if he's not going to help you win the week, he's just going to help you not lose it. I mean, for Pittsburgh and Seattle, we're not utilizing Noah Fant. We already know that, but I'm also not even going to consider Pat Freiermuth this week. I don't care if he has 8 targets for 8 receptions and 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't care. I'm not relying on Mason Rudolph to get my fantasy tight end enough targets to help me win a championship. Now, George Pickens had a great week last week. That was awesome. Good for him. Pat Freiermuth didn't even see 1 target from Mason Rudolph last week. Now, was it because of score? Was it because of something? I don't know, but I'm not taking a guy with 0 targets in week 16, putting in my lineup for week 17 for my fantasy championship and expecting a different outcome. As far as streaming options go at the tight end position, Gerald Everett may be one of the best streaming options this week because not only is he getting a Denver Broncos defense that gave up a touchdown to Mike Gesicki last week and then 3 touchdowns to Sam Laporta 2 weeks ago, but they haven't been able to stop tight ends all year long. And on top of that, Gerald Everett has 3 straight games with 8 targets. Clearly, they're looking his way quite a bit right now with everybody around him banged up, a change in the offensive scheme, and of course, Justin Herbert not under center right now. Will Gerald Everett have huge upside this week? I would say probably not, but given the fact that it is such a great matchup and the fact that he's been peppered with targets as of recent, I definitely would be willing to risk Gerald Everett over a lot of other options. I'm going to make this analysis short and sweet. If you drafted Travis Kelce, you used a 1st or a 2nd round pick on him. If you made it through the last 2 weeks with incredibly poor performances from Kelce, then you might be questioning yourself on whether or not he makes his way into your lineup this week. But this is it. This is why we drafted Kelce. For this matchup right here, going up against the Bengals, who have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to the tight end position this season. And maybe you've backed up Travis Kelce with a guy like Sam Laporta or Isaiah Likely, or maybe you're thinking about using a streaming option over him or something like that. But don't. We're rolling with Travis Kelce this week. He is going to be my number 1 tight end. The matchup is there, and dear Lord, Kansas City cannot get any worse. So they're going to go back to what works, and that's going to be the Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce connection. And this matchup is not good enough to stop that. All right, the final matchup of Week 17 is going to be Green Bay and Minnesota. And of course, the torn ACL and MCL is a huge hit for not only TJ Hockenson and the Vikings, but for fantasy owners who are relying on him heading into their fantasy championships. Now, if you were looking for an option potentially with Minnesota, I'm not going to go that route. They've got Josh Oliver. They're probably going to mix and match a couple of different guys and rotate them in and off the field. I really don't see a whole lot of consistency there, especially when you've got Justin Jefferson, who will see plenty of targets, especially with Jair Alexander being out. Jordan Addison is day-to-day. He could still end up playing this week, especially getting an extra day of rest. And then, of course, you've got KJ Osborne. So with all of those guys, I just don't see the tight end position being very fruitful for Minnesota in Week 17. But for Green Bay and Tucker Kraft, you could try to go this option. He's not my favorite streamer this week, but he's definitely a guy that I would be keeping an eye on. And probably a majority of his value is going to be based solely on scoring a touchdown. If he can get a touchdown, he's probably going to rank anywhere from 12 to 14 on the week, but if he doesn't, he's probably going to be a little bit closer to the 20s. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it, my analysis for every tight end matchup here in Week 17, also known is championship weekend. Hopefully you all are set and ready to go. But if you still have some questions that were not answered here, Thursday will bring all of our rankings videos that will help you get those tough questions out of the way. But for now, I'm gonna get going. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I will catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.